This happened when I was about 12 or 13, back when I still thought I understood what being grown up meant. I had developed earlier than most girls my age, which is something I didn't really think about at the time, but adults definitely noticed, and that fact became important later. I was spending the night at my friend Rosa's place, and her mom had asked us to watch Rosa's little sister while she went out for a few hours. It didn't seem like a big deal. We'd done it before, and we figured we could handle it. After a while of being stuck inside, we decided to take her little sister to a nearby park that had a playground. It was close enough that we didn't feel like we were doing anything wrong, and we mostly just wanted somewhere to hang out while her sister burned off some energy. We walked over and let her play, while Rosa and I pushed her on the swings and talked about random things like school and music. For about the first 30 minutes, everything felt normal. Eventually, two guys showed up and sat down at a picnic table near the playground. One of them looked like he might have been in his late teens, maybe around 17 or 18, with short dark hair and an average build. The other one stood out immediately. He was much older, probably in his early 30s, and a lot bigger than the younger guy. He had a full beard, long curly hair that went past his shoulders, and he carried himself in a way that made him seem very comfortable taking up space. We noticed them when they arrived, but we didn't really think much of it. People came and went from that park all the time, and at first they weren't doing anything except sitting and talking. That changed when the older guy started talking to us. He called out casually, asked our names, introduced himself as Chris, and said the younger guy was his nephew. He asked what we were doing there and how our day was going. I answered him because I'd been raised to be polite to adults, even when I felt uncomfortable. But I kept my responses short and didn't really engage beyond that. Rosa did the same. We stayed focused on pushing her sister on the swings, hoping the conversation would just fade out. Instead, he kept asking more questions. He asked where we were going later, what we had planned for the rest of the day, and whether we wanted to hang out with him and his nephew. As he talked, he kept moving closer, closing the distance bit by bit in a way that felt deliberate. We told him we were just heading home afterward, and that we weren't allowed to go anywhere else. That didn't seem to bother him. He asked if I wanted a beer, then asked if I smoked. I remember feeling confused more than anything, because I was obviously a kid, even if I didn't look like one at first glance. I told him no to both. That's when he started commenting on how I looked. He told me I was pretty and asked if I had a boyfriend. Before I could even really respond, he added that he'd just gotten out of jail and was looking for a girlfriend. The way he said it wasn't a joke or casual small talk. It felt like a sales pitch. I told him I didn't have a boyfriend and wasn't interested in having one. During all of this, he kept turning to his nephew every so often, and from the way they talked, it became clear they were involved in a local gang. Even at that age, I knew that wasn't something to take lightly. That realization was when the situation stopped feeling awkward and started feeling genuinely unsafe. He went quiet for a few minutes, and I hoped that meant they'd leave. Instead, he started up again, asking where we were going later and whether we wanted to come hang out with them. He talked about how much fun it would be and how they could get us whatever we wanted. I told him again that we couldn't go anywhere and had to take Rosa's sister home. Looking back, we should have left right then. At the time, I didn't. I was starting to hit that rebellious stage where I thought I could handle myself and that adults overreacted about everything. We moved to another picnic table, thinking if we ignored them, they'd get the message. They didn't. Within a minute, Chris and his nephew followed us and sat down again. The nephew stayed farther away, clearly uncomfortable, but Chris sat right next to me. He leaned in close, told me again how pretty I was, and said he could be my boyfriend. He kept suggesting we go somewhere together, anywhere I wanted. The nephew tried to redirect him, quietly suggesting they leave, pointing out that we weren't going anywhere. Chris ignored him completely. The nephew stayed farther away, clearly uncomfortable, but Chris sat right next to me. He leaned in close, told me again how pretty I was, and said he could be my boyfriend. He kept suggesting we go somewhere together, anywhere I wanted. The nephew tried to redirect him, quietly suggesting they leave, pointing out that we weren't going anywhere. Chris ignored him completely. At some point, Chris put his arm around my shoulders and pulled me into his side. I froze. I didn't know how to react, and I didn't want to make him angry. I tried to slowly move away, but he tightened his grip and kept talking about taking care of me and wanting to spend time with me. Then he kissed me. It wasn't quick or accidental. It was forceful, and it shocked me enough that I couldn't even process it at first. That was the moment I knew we had to leave. I told him we needed to take Rosa's sister home because her mom would be back soon. He didn't want to let me go, so I lied and told him we'd come back after dropping her off. Eventually, he let me stand up. As I turned away, he grabbed me again from behind, pulling me into him. I remember feeling confused, scared, and strangely detached all at once. I kept pretending everything was fine, repeating that we had to leave and promising we'd come back. Finally, he let go. We walked away quickly, then faster, and when we realized he was following us, we ran. We made it back to Rosa's apartment just in time, and watched from the window as he walked past, calling my name. Later, when Rosa's mom came home, everything felt tense. When there was a knock at the door and I heard his voice, my heart dropped. Rosa's mom answered and shut it down immediately, telling them to leave. They came back again later that night, knocking, calling our names, and trying the doorknob, but thankfully the door was locked. We never saw them again, and we stayed away from that park for a long time after that. Even now, I can still remember his face, the sound of his voice, and the way that afternoon shifted my understanding of how dangerous people can be, especially when you're young and don't yet know how to protect yourself. This happened when I was about 20 years old. At the time, I worked as a kind of support worker for a boy named Sam, who was autistic and in his late tweens. We'd meet once a week for a few hours, and our time together was usually very relaxed. We'd go to playgrounds, walk around outside, sometimes hike easy trails, or just sit somewhere and talk if that's what he felt like doing that day. I'd been working with him long enough that I knew his routines pretty well, and most days were predictable in a good way. One afternoon, we were at a playground not far from a tram stop. Sam was playing on the equipment, and I was sitting nearby keeping an eye on him. That's when I noticed a man standing off to the side. At first, there wasn't anything obviously wrong about him, but what stood out was that he didn't seem to be there with a child. He wasn't interacting with anyone, wasn't on his phone, wasn't really doing anything except watching. I remember glancing over at him a few times, trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid. When Sam finished playing, we headed toward the tram because we were planning to go hiking for a bit before my shift ended. As we got on, I noticed the same man board the tram as well. Again, I tried to rationalize it. It's public transport, and plenty of people get on and off at the same stops. Still, I kept an eye on him without letting Sam notice anything was off. We got off at our stop, and once again, the man got off too, just through a different door. At that point, my awareness definitely shifted. It still could have been coincidence, but something about the pattern started to feel wrong. To reach the hiking trail, you had to walk through a quiet neighborhood, and then toward the woods. As we started walking, I noticed the man walking in the same direction behind us. The closer we got to the edge of the neighborhood, the more uncomfortable I felt. I didn't like the idea of being in the woods with only Sam and myself if someone really was following us. I finally decided not to push it any further. I told Sam that I'd changed my mind and that we wouldn't go hiking after all. Luckily, he accepted that without any issue. As we turned around, I saw the man turn down a side street. I felt a small sense of relief until I realized he stopped about 20 meters down and just stood there. He was facing away from us, pretending to look in the opposite direction, but it felt very deliberate. When we passed him and continued walking, I glanced back and saw him start walking again, still behind us. That's when I was sure. He wasn't just coincidentally nearby anymore. I felt my stomach tighten. but I forced myself to stay calm so I wouldn't upset Sam. We stopped briefly at another playground, mostly to buy myself time and think. I didn't want to rush Sam or make him anxious, but I also didn't want to keep moving toward isolated areas. I had promised Sam earlier that we'd go to a dam at the end of the trail, and I knew breaking that promise could cause problems. Thankfully, there was another route to the dam that stayed closer to the road. The only part that worried me was a pedestrian tunnel under the tram line. For a moment, you're completely out of sight. I wanted to hurry through it, but Sam didn't want to, so we walked at his pace. When we came out on the other side, I realized the man hadn't entered the tunnel behind us yet, which gave me a small sense of relief. At the dam, I pulled out my phone and started writing notes about the man, his clothes, his height, anything I could remember. I figured if this continued, I'd go to the police the next day. Sam spent some time throwing rocks into the water, and eventually he got thirsty, so we headed toward a nearby store. There was a bus stop near the store, and the plan was to take the bus back to his place afterward. That part of the afternoon is a bit fuzzy in my memory. I don't clearly remember seeing the man during the walk to the store, but I had a strong sense that he was still nearby. I'm fairly sure he didn't come inside the store, but when we left, he was there again, waiting outside. By then, my nerves were shot. At the bus stop, he came and stood right next to me. Not across the street, not a few steps away, but directly beside me. I remember thinking that under no circumstances could I let him follow us to Sam's home. My heart was racing, but I kept my expression neutral. That's when I realized that all my notes were based on his clothing, and my phone had a camera. I opened my notes app and tried to discreetly take a photo of him. It didn't come out very well, so I opened the camera app and took another one. The phone made a sound. He looked straight at me, gave a small, awkward grin, and half waved, like he'd been caught doing something embarrassing. Then he turned and walked away from the bus stop. Just like that. I stayed alert, scanning the area to make sure he wasn't hiding nearby, but he didn't get on the bus with us. I didn't relax until I walked Sam all the way home and watched him go inside. I explained everything to his mom, telling her that Sam didn't seem aware of what was happening, but that if he acted differently later, that might be why. On my way home, I called my own mom just to hear a familiar voice. Even though the man was gone, I avoided the wooded path near my apartment that evening. The next day, I went to the police with the photos and my notes. Nothing really came of it, since he hadn't technically done anything illegal. I never saw him again, and I hope I never do. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and for a good part of my childhood we lived near my old elementary school. Even after classes or school events were over, the playground stayed open on weekends and during the summer, so it was a pretty normal place for families to hang out. There was also a recreation center nearby, but the school playground was closer and easier to get to. This happened during the summer after I finished 5th grade in 1999. My mom volunteered to help maintain the small garden in front of the school, and since we lived close by, she'd often bring us along while she worked. My younger brother had just finished 3rd grade and could play with other kids on the playground. My youngest sister had just finished kindergarten, so she stayed close to my older sister or my mom. I was the oldest, so I usually rode my bike around the sidewalks near the building. I remember sticking to the pavement because my bike was old and didn't stop well on grass or dirt. At one point, I rode along the side of the school where there were a set of double doors recessed into the wall. If you stopped right in front of them, there were short walls on either side before the building continued. My mom was working closer to the main entrance, where she could see the playground and part of the building, but not this section. I don't even remember why I stopped there, but I think there was a water fountain nearby. While I was standing there with my bike, a man walked up to me and started talking. I remember noticing that he was wearing large, dark sunglasses. As he spoke, something about the situation immediately made me uncomfortable. I realized very quickly that something was wrong, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time. I turned away, partly out of embarrassment, but I could still see his reflection in the glass of the doors behind me. He kept asking me questions, what I was doing there, if I went to school there, things like that. I answered him because he was an adult, and I had been raised to be polite, even though every instinct I had was telling me to leave. I didn't really understand what he was doing, or why his behavior felt so strange, but I knew I didn't like it. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to get on my bike and ride away. He wasn't blocking me or chasing me, so I just left without saying anything else. I didn't tell my mom what happened. I felt embarrassed and confused, and I didn't even have the words to explain why the encounter bothered me so much. I left my bike near the car and went to the playground to distract myself. That's where I ran into a boy named Ronnie, who I'd met during the school year. We started talking near the edge of the playground, away from the younger kids. At one point, he asked me if I had seen the weird guy near the building. When I said yes, he mentioned that the man had been acting strangely. We both thought the situation was uncomfortable, but neither of us really understood what had happened. As far as I know, he never told his parents either. Looking back, it's strange that we didn't put it together, especially given our age and what we'd already learned in school. I think we both just wanted to believe it was nothing and move on. There weren't many kids around that day, and none of my siblings ever mentioned seeing him. Years later, around 2009, the memory came back to me out of nowhere. This time, I understood exactly what had happened and why it had made me feel so uneasy. I told my mom about it then, and she was shocked that I hadn't said anything at the time. She didn't remember hearing any reports about something similar happening at the school, and as far as we know, nothing more serious ever came of it. I never saw the man again, but the memory stuck with me. It's one of those moments that didn't fully make sense at the time, but looking back as an adult, it's deeply unsettling to realize how vulnerable I really was. This happened a few months ago, late at night, when my friend Em and I decided to hang out somewhere away from our houses. We ended up going to a small children's park nearby because it was quiet, mostly hidden, and had a bit of shelter in case the weather turned bad. It was close to midnight, and the park was completely empty when we arrived. After a while, we climbed up onto one of the play structures. It had a circular platform at the top and a narrow ladder in the center that was clearly designed for kids, not teenagers. Once you were up there, it felt oddly isolated from the rest of the park. From that height, we could see the street running alongside it, lit by a few spaced-out streetlights. That's when we noticed a man across the street. He was wearing running clothes and was circling a lamppost in a strange, unsteady way, almost like he was leaning on it for balance. At first, we didn't think much of it. It was late, people do weird things at night, and we just assumed he'd had a bit too much to drink. Still, we kept glancing over to check on him, because something about the way he moved felt off. After a minute, he pulled out his phone while still holding onto the lamppost and lifted it in our direction. From where we were sitting, it really looked like he was pointing it straight at us. The park itself was pretty dark, but we weren't that far from him. I asked Em what she thought he was doing, and she shrugged it off, saying he was probably just calling someone and couldn't even see us properly. I wanted to believe that, but the longer he stood there, the more uncomfortable I felt. He wasn't talking into the phone. He was just holding it up, angled toward the park. Eventually, he put the phone away and started focusing on the fence that separated the street from the park. It came up to about his chest. He stepped closer, did a small hop next to it, and then jogged a little farther down the road, still glancing back at the fence and occasionally placing his hands on it. I told Em it looked like he was trying to figure out how to get over, but she kept insisting he was probably just heading home. We kept watching him as he moved farther away, and I remember saying that if he turned the corner at the end of the street, I was leaving immediately. The park was shaped like a triangle, and if he turned that corner, he'd be heading straight toward the entrance gate. For a moment, we lost sight of him behind some trees. Em said it was fine, that he was gone. Then we saw him again on the other side of the park. He had turned the corner. At that point, my stomach dropped. I told Em I was done waiting around, and that if he came through the gate, I was leaving whether she came with me or not. We both watched as he jogged along the outside of the fence toward the gate. When he reached it, he stopped and looked directly at us. He stood there for a second, just staring. Then he opened the gate and stepped inside the park. That was it. I panicked and started trying to get down the ladder as fast as I could. It was narrow, awkward, and way harder to use than it looked, especially in a rush. Em finally realized something wasn't right and started climbing down too. As soon as we hit the ground, we walked quickly along the edge of the park toward the opposite exit. The moment we started moving together, the man broke into a run toward us. I don't think I've ever felt fear hit me that fast. There was no one else around, and I knew we wouldn't stand a chance if he caught up to us. We ran. Somehow, we made it out of the park before he reached us. When I looked back, he had stopped on top of a small hill near one of the slides. He stood there watching us, arms raised slightly, like he was frustrated or giving up. We didn't stop until we were well down the road and couldn't see him anymore. At the bus stop, we just stood there in silence for a while, trying to process what had just happened. We were both shaken, and neither of us wanted to be alone, but we ended up heading home separately. Even now, thinking about it still makes my chest tighten. Having a grown man chase us through a playground in the middle of the night is something I don't think I'll ever fully shake. When I was around 13 or 14, I spent most of my free time at my friend Jennifer's house. She lived on a long dirt road surrounded by woods, with only a handful of neighbors spaced far apart. It always felt isolated, especially at night. Across the main road from her neighborhood was a much bigger subdivision with streetlights, a pool, and a playground where a lot of kids from school hung out during the summer. As we got older, we started testing boundaries. Once Jennifer's parents went to bed, we'd quietly slip out the back door and walk down to the lake near her house. After doing that a few times without getting caught, we got bolder. Eventually, we started crossing the main road and walking all the way into the subdivision across the street. It felt exciting, like we were getting away with something big. One night, it was just me, Jennifer, and another friend, Amber. We snuck out late and walked along the road, laughing too loud and constantly reminding each other to keep our voices down. By the time we reached the playground, it was probably between 1 and 2 in the morning. We sat on the swings, pushing ourselves back and forth and talking about random things, enjoying the quiet and the feeling of being out when we weren't supposed to be. Around that time, parents in our area had been warning kids about a man who had been bothering or grabbing girls around our age early in the mornings near bus stops. Nothing had been confirmed yet, but everyone was on edge. I tried not to think about it, but standing there in the empty playground, it was hard not to. While Jennifer and Amber were still talking, I started looking around. Across from the swings were 3 small trees planted in a straight line, each with a few feet of space between them. The streetlights lit up the park well enough that you could see movement clearly. That's when I noticed a tall silhouette moving behind the trees, slowly shifting from one to the next. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing, but then it happened again. The figure moved just enough to stay hidden, like they were trying to keep us in view without stepping fully into the light. My stomach tightened. Whoever it was had clearly noticed us. I leaned in and whispered that we needed to leave, that it was getting late. This time, neither of them argued. The mood shifted instantly. We got off the swings and started walking out of the subdivision. Once we were a little farther away, I told them what I had seen. That was enough to make us break into a run. We ran the entire way back, down the main road and through Jennifer's neighborhood, not stopping until we were safely inside her house. None of us slept much that night. We never snuck out like that again. I still don't know who that person was or what they wanted, and honestly, I don't want to. I'm just glad I noticed when I did. This happened a very long time ago, when I was around 5 or 6 years old. I'm 27 now. For most of my childhood, I didn't remember it at all. The memory didn't resurface until I was about 15, and even then I wasn't sure if it was real or something my mind had created. When I finally asked my mom about it, she confirmed that it had happened, or at least the parts she was aware of. I've lived in the Netherlands my entire life. The conversations back then were in Dutch, but I'll translate everything as best I can. When I was little, my family lived in a very quiet neighborhood with around 100 houses. The neighborhood was laid out in a large circle, with only one entrance for cars and 2 smaller paths for bikes or pedestrians. We referred to the side near the car entrance as the front street, and the opposite side as the back street. On the back street there was a small playground. It was visible from several houses and had a simple setup: a blue swing set with 2 swings, a yellow climbing structure shaped like a snail, and a small soccer field with 2 goals. I was allowed to play outside on my own at that age, but I wasn't supposed to go to the back street by myself. That day, I ignored that rule and went anyway, heading straight for the swings. The playground was empty when I arrived, probably because it was close to dinner time. I remember what I was wearing surprisingly clearly: a blue dress, jeans underneath, and white tights, the kind a lot of little girls wore back then. I had been playing by myself for a short while when 2 older boys showed up. Looking back now, I think they were probably teenagers, maybe 14 to 16 years old. At first, I wasn't afraid. I assumed they were just passing through. That changed very quickly. One of them suddenly grabbed me from behind. I remember how tight his arm felt and how confused I was before I even felt scared. The other boy stood close by. They started pulling me further into the playground, toward an area with bushes where the houses couldn't see us as clearly. The boy holding me spoke in a low, threatening voice, saying that if I didn't do what he told me to, I would get hurt. I was terrified and completely frozen. I couldn't understand why this was happening or what I was supposed to do. I didn't scream or fight back. I just stood there, too scared to move or speak. Then suddenly, his grip loosened. I realized why when I saw a woman walking down the street in front of the playground. The moment I felt his hold weaken, I ran. I ran straight toward the woman, trying to explain what had just happened, though I don't remember if my words even made sense. Then I ran again, all the way home. When I got there, I didn't tell my mom what had happened. I was still shaken, and I was also afraid I'd get in trouble for going somewhere I wasn't allowed to be. Keeping quiet felt easier at the time. Months later, our doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw a woman around my mother's age standing there with a boy. I immediately recognized him as one of the 2 boys from the playground. I didn't say anything to them. I left the door open and ran to my mom, telling her, "That's him." She didn't understand at first, so I explained everything as best I could. My mom confronted the woman and her son, but he denied everything. Since my mom hadn't known about the incident when it happened and couldn't prove anything, nothing came of it. Looking back now, I realize how incredibly lucky I was. At the time, I didn't fully understand the seriousness of the situation. That only came years later, when I was old enough to process what could have happened. It's unsettling to think about, but I'm grateful that I was able to get away, and that the memory, for a long time, stayed buried where my younger self didn't have to carry it.